It's time to set the record queer. It just doesn't make sense to have two jacks on a TDM phone.
Hello, and welcome to Setting the Record Queer, a podcast where queer people talk about the pursuits and communities they love. This is episode 2. It's about retro technology and computers. My name's Alexis. My pronouns are it, its, and she, her, and I'm one of your hosts.
I'm Kaylee. My pronouns are she, her, and Alexis, we have had a busy month.
Oh my god, have we? Have we?
I think to start off, we can talk about, we went to a small speedrunning event in Toronto, called Games Finished Adequately.
Yeah, we talked about that one in episode 0. If you haven't listened to it, you should go back. And this was maybe the greatest speedrunning event ever held. It featured 4 personal bests in an 8-hour marathon, 2 of which were world records.
And one of which was my world record.
The other one of them was my personal best. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it went super well, super fun. Should definitely check out the next Games Finished. There'll be a link in the show notes for that.
Yeah. The other thing we did this month was we went to MatsuriCon, and that was a lot of fun. We wore costumes and walked around with a bunch of anime nerds, and it was great. That was pretty much all we did. We played a lot of board games. We tried a really cool game called Aegis that was like basically Voltron Warframe, but like kind of not as difficult. It was pretty great.
I think that game will have just come out for realsies around the time this episode airs, so that's a nice coincidence if you're interested.
Yeah, and then today, we did something very, very exciting. Kaylee got a special package in the mail the other day, and in it was a little circuit board that had a video tap for a Virtual Boy in it. If you're not familiar, the Virtual Boy was an interesting 90s Nintendo project, which was basically virtual reality gaming, but in the 90s and was garbage quality. There was no video out on it, but now, thanks to a very special, very smart human being named Furtek, we actually have a video outboard for the Virtual Boy, and we got ours installed today by our good friend, I Have One Big Eye, our local retro console modder. And so now we have a Virtual Boy that outputs RGB quality video, and it's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, and it's just in time for me to be able to submit for the next Games Done Quick, some Virtual Boy stuff, so finishing that up. That's been a lot of this week.
Oh, that has been a lot of this week. It is a stressful week. It's Games Done Quick submissions.
Speaking of, this retro hardware mod, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Gravis, or at Gravislizard on Twitter. Pronouns, he, him. I don't really know how to say what I do.
You're a retro computers and technology enthusiast, obsessive Twitter threader?
It's a big... Twitter threader is almost more accurate than anything else.
You are a Twitter personality who retro computers as a verb.
There we go.
No one's going to get that. No one's going to get that reference.
Applying has interest in retro computers, as an adjective, as a modifier, feels more appropriate. I try not to pigeonhole myself. If you want to see someone who's defined by the retro computing, you want to check out Foon Turing.
Yeah, that's accurate. So yeah, Gravis, let's get right into this. You like old technology, and it's really cool. So let's talk about this. Where did this start?
So the thing you have to understand is that I was born a nerd. You may have learned to be it, but I was born into it. Arguably, it's true. My parents, we're from California. Not the Bay Area, but close enough. And my dad used to work for the phone company. And the phone company has deep connections to the development of computers in general, the development of a tremendous amount of technology that we take for granted nowadays. We don't need to make the connection to smartphones, but we could talk for ages, countless hours, about the influence that the phone company had on all of this. Not to mention, I almost was bougie. My dad was a very high-ranking member of the phone company at one point, before everything exploded in the late 80s. So as a result, my parents were early adopters on a whole bunch of things such as computers. They had IBM PC, I think, right from the get-go. And so my house was full of phone equipment and computer equipment from all eras, and a lot of it not all that common, I think, to my peers at that time. I mean, it wasn't like I was drowning in supercomputers or anything, but all the same, I had access to a lot of stuff. I think one of the most important things is I had access to a lot of old, broken stuff. And my dad and the rest of my family were into low-level electronic stuff, repair. And it just kind of, ballooned from there. My parents were always buying tech stuff, and the other thing, and I think this plays a big role here, is I just told you all that, but conversely, and this is what makes my childhood interesting, if in this regard, in my opinion. As I said, my dad lost his job, and so at some point my family dropped from the middle class into the lower class, and all of a sudden, all the new interesting gadgets just stopped. And as a result, my experience of technology got time shifted, because all of a sudden I had an NES as my primary game console in 1998, at which point all my friends had, well, not that I had many friends at the time, but those that did were talking about like the PlayStation and the N64. I'd never seen one. So I had this strange experience of, I didn't have any CDs really, so circa almost 2000, I was playing an NES on a IBM PC and listening to tapes. And I'm not young enough I'm not old enough for that to have been an appropriate childhood for me in a lot of ways.
That's actually a really interesting difference even between the two of us, I think. Those of you who know me know I'm also a, retro technology enthusiast, though maybe my interests are a little bit more focused. But what I think is really interesting to me is I grew up on the Nintendo GameCube, the Wii, going forward from there, and then in adolescence and adulthood have gone backwards to the NES. And I feel like that's a common story you see with, retro tech enthusiasts, but you were there with, these technologies as they were developing, but are still into them today, which I think, I don't know, it's an interesting difference in perspective. So one question I do have, I see you talk about like literally every kind of technology under the sun. Is there a certain like kind of range of things you're into? Is it just computers, video games, or like what encompasses your fascination?
Boy, howdy.
Everything is an acceptable answer. That's really okay.
Sort of. But I feel it needs to be qualified because there's focuses here. Okay, it's not just the fact that it is a computing instrument or whatever. It's what I think it is, and this ties right into I think the core of what keeps me interested in this. And if you'll forgive me, I'm going to step back to something you mentioned a moment ago. After I say this, the common element to all the things that I'm into that are older is that they are forgotten. And when I say that, what I mean is, talk to someone about old video games and what pops out. The NES. The NES is not what a person who's currently in their 40s, for instance, remembers as the gaming system of the 80s. That's late. It didn't come to America until 1985. Prior to that, there were a bunch of other devices, and even after the NES came out, it still had competition. This is not to mention that it had heavy competition in Japan itself and in other countries. In the UK, there were a whole bunch of systems that we never even got here. Literally never got them. There were all these things going on in the world, experiences that were extremely important, visceral ones to people at some point, and now they have been erased by the winners writing history. And I don't want to come off like, oh, hey, anyone who doesn't do their homework, anyone who just likes the NES because that's what they remember is a bad person. Not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we have a bad tendency as a culture, Jason Scott will tell you about this until his lungs give out, to simply forget anything that does not continue burning as brightly as it once did. Anyone whose torch goes out just sort of falls off the face of the planet. And so all these things that came before we forget, and all these things are different. They're different parallel universes that we could have lived in. But instead, we chose the one that we did, and maybe we didn't choose the best one, or maybe we chose one that might be great, but boy, what things would have happened had we not. The experiences we could have had things not gone the way that they did. That's what I think unifies everything that I'm into, is that it's something we could have chosen but didn't.
Wow. I was not expecting a 5-minute explanation of that. I was expecting to be like, yeah, I like computers from this year to this year, and other scattered technologies that I may have got. No, you've got written a book about this. Clearly,
I could. I've thought about it.
I hope you do someday. I would read it.
I mean, it's what I'm trying to. I've written the book. It's on Twitter. Follow me. You'll get it.
Follow him. That's wow. Honestly.
You've mentioned that you write a lot of Twitter threads that are very fascinating reads. Is there anything else you do with this passion, though? Do you collect or do...
And how?
We know you do research, but...
I should be cautionary. I should be careful in how I say this. Do I collect? I would say that I don't. And when I say that, what I mean is I did collect at one point. I try not, at this point in my life, to buy anything I don't intend to use. But as far as what else do I do, I do buy these things and acquire them from friends and find them in the garbage. But what I'm trying to do is less collect for myself and more collect for others. I'm trying to approach this in a didactic way. What I want is less to have a great nostalgic experience for myself. What I would like is for people to remember the pasts that we forgot. So I started a YouTube channel, and the purpose of it is to show people these things not in what I feel to be, if you'll forgive me using this charged terminology, exploitative fashion that I think other people do. Not everyone, but I think there's a lot of YouTubers who are like, check it out, everybody. Hey, what's up, YouTube? This is a Sega Genesis add-on you've never heard of. Some of them genuinely like these things. Other ones, it's clickbait. And what bothers me about it is that people approach it in a way that, to me, is more novelty in its atmosphere, rather than what would it be like to acquire this thing when you're 12 and it is the state of the art. To me, that's the important perspective. All of these things that I own, I don't want to experience them from a 2018 perspective because, let's be frank, they're gone. They're over. Some of the stuff, what makes the NES special? It's timeless. We can still enjoy these games. The ZX Spectrum is not like that. The ZX Spectrum was an 8-bit computer that came out prior to the NES by several years. The games on it are garbage. Like, there's a few of them that you could enjoy, but they are garbage. They're not good. They do not hold up. And if you sat down virtually anyone who's currently 14 and asked them to play them, they would walk away within seconds. None of them would hold their interest. And it's hard to, I think, to put yourself in the shoes of someone who didn't have anything else, unless you're led through that experience by someone who either was there or has otherwise, acquired that perspective. And I think that trying to consume these things from a 2018 perspective just kills them for you. So I'm trying to show people things in an objective fashion rather than a very subjective, very reactive 2018, like, look at this wacky thing. It's more of a, here's this thing, let's use it, let's see how we feel.
So, forgive me if this is totally off base, but the picture I'm getting of you as a tech enthusiast is a cross between a technology historian and the ZX Spectrum playing equivalent of a Civil War reenactment role player.
That is spot on. That is absolutely
Fantastic.
Spot on. You got me to the molecule.
Fantastic.
That's what I want to be. That's what I'm, trying to be. ADHD makes it hard, but I'm trying.
It's a cool mission. It really is. It's something really, really unique. So, Twitter, at least as far as I've seen, is more or less your platform of choice for talking about this stuff. And I feel like, this is something that would probably serve really well in being in a format that doesn't limit you to 240, 280, whatever, characters plus maybe up to 4 pictures per thought. You could be in a blog format. I know you've talked a little bit about YouTubing and stuff. Why Twitter?
The reason for Twitter is, as I saw a beautiful post a couple days ago that said, I thought it summed up my feelings on this perfectly. It said, I don't read threads that begin with thread, : That's the coward's thread. A good thread starts out with a single post and just dives in, not knowing where it's going and not prepared. I'm paraphrasing heavily, but the point is, I very rarely go to Twitter with the intent to post 46 times about something. I feel that Twitter, and I have very powerful opinions about this sociologically, Twitter occupies a position in our ability to interact with each other where it's not quite chat room, not quite forum, not quite website, not quite blog. It is something else that I think mirrors the way that a conversation at a party works, where I'm going to go ahead and just be the worst person in the room here. I'm great at parties. I am. I am. There's no ego here, okay? The fact of the matter is that when I talk at parties, people cluster around me. And then they drift away. They cluster around me until I reach a topic they don't want to be here for anymore, and they go somewhere else. And maybe they come back later when they literally, someone at a party will literally overhear me go, Sony Discman, and their ears perk up, and they trot over to see what's going on. I had one of those. It had the little remote on the cord, and all of a sudden they're back in the conversation. Twitter, to me, is a little bit more like that, where if you go to a forum and you click on a thread, you got to go make yourself a drink first and take your shoes off because you're in. This is what you're doing right now. I feel that Twitter has benefits in both directions. One, I don't feel like I'm dominating the conversation. Two, I don't feel like there's very many expectations of me. And three, people can ditch out whenever they want to.
That makes a lot of sense and has actually given me a little bit more of an appreciation for the hell site that is Twitter. Mm-hmm. Maybe not a good thing.
I'm very sorry to have done this to you.
So the next thing I want to talk about is the retro technology enthusiast Civil War reenactment community. Is this community a thing? What's it like? I mean, I know of a couple Twitter people that I follow and that people I follow, but is there something beyond just a couple enthusiasts shouting into the mechanical void about weird old computers?
It's a weird subject. It really is. You would think. There's so many things that have very easily identifiable communities. The retro train enthusiast community obviously has, you could Google it and you'll find a forum with, 285,000 posts a year. You could look up vintage lamps, and I've done this. I found a website that was just light fixture enthusiasts, and it was a forum and a gallery, and I found some really gorgeous light fixtures on there. It's one of my favorite sites. There's also the ceiling fan enthusiasts forum. That's not a joke. It's got a tiling ceiling fan background.
Sign me the heck up.
If you're from any of these communities, please get in contact with us.
If you are queer and enthusiastic about ceiling fans, at me. Oh my God. Anyways, continue.
It's extremely powerful. My point is that you can easily find these things, but as noted, is there a cohesive community? I couldn't say. It's more like a whole bunch of separate little ones. There's the vintage Mac community, for instance, is a very cohesive community that's just about that one little topic. So with that said, I feel like it's more like, is our existence separable from technology? No. None of us were born outside of its grasp. We were all born into the era of the dark, wet blanket of technology covering us and smothering us and smashing us down into the mud where we are computers. And it's inseparable. We all know stuff about this stuff. Everyone, everywhere is at some level a computer person, a video game person, or in some way part of this. And so when you talk about old stuff, it is like if somebody likes food, so you start talking about pizza. Maybe they don't relate on pizza, but they relate on food. It's domain knowledge. We're all in some way part of it. And so that's why I think it's less of a community and more of a big shifting window. Everyone's a retro enthusiast, but for a different retro. It's just a matter of when you were born and whether your childhood was time shifted in which direction, what appeals to you as almost invariably a thing you weren't there for. It's always this a thing you weren't quite there for. You were almost there for it. It was something your older brother had or whatever. It was something you just barely saw before it disappeared and was replaced by something else. It's almost always what people's retro stuff turns into.
So you've mentioned a number of subcommunities. Are there any that you participate in?
Not really. I don't really participate in communities. I'm allergic to chats, so I'm not on any Discords, I'm not on any Slacks, I'm not on any Telegram chats, except one I actually run myself called Paint and Chrome. I made a separate Telegram handle just for this. So what we do in this Telegram chat is we share ideally pictures and feelings about the design of things, specifically industrial design, which I feel is a topic in particular that's a subset of all this stuff. That is the shape of things and the placement of buttons and controls, the actual design of the physical chassis of things rather than their function, that I consider almost completely unrelated to the retro thing, except that I feel that in the past we all did this better. This leads into a later complaint that I'll make. The only real community as such, other than I have another Telegram chat that has 5 people in it that are all personal friends of mine. We get on the phone sometimes, the telephone, and have a conference call off of my buddy's phone system that he runs.
That's the most Gravis thing I've ever heard. Yeah, I just get on my buddy's conference call system to talk to my friends. Sure, buddy, you do you. So, what's it like to be queer in this community?
Man, not bad. That's the thing. I want to just come right out with some bombshell of a statement like retro computing makes you gay, but I don't know. It's the vast majority of people that I've met in my life that have been into old electronics were also extremely queer. However, the vast majority of people that I've met in my life were extremely queer. I think queerness is accelerating the same way that it's the global warming of sexuality. We seem to be unable to stop it. Everyone's very gay now, and so I don't know. I think I have a twisted perception of this. What I will say is this: I've never ever heard anything like, well, you could go get information on that thing from this guy, but he's don't tell him you're gay. Like don't tell him you're trans. Like, I don't think that you could get away with being a homophobe in the retro computing, retro technology sort of sphere. And I think a big reason for that, honestly, is that a big part of this has to do with aesthetics. We joke, especially in the last couple of years, thanks to Macintosh Plus, aesthetic, but is it not a very queer thing to be very tuned in to what you like to see? Is it a tenuous connection? I don't know. I've never been straight. I've never even spoken to a straight. I do think that the aesthetic nature of it, aesthetics being a huge part of this, is a huge part of what I'm talking and thinking about. I don't think we could separate it from just the idea that analyzing what makes you feel good is sadly kind of a queer thing.
Huh. Never thought about that, but yeah? What do you think, Kaylee?
Yeah, I can definitely see it.
Cool. All right. So let's move on to the next bit of the podcast here, our performance showcase. So in this performance showcase, Gravis, I am going to use an online tool to rate your Twitter skill in terms of your grammar and number of followers. No. Okay.
You can. I'd like to know what it says.
If you get a C or below, you need to turn a rewrite by the end of 4th period.
No, but what we're gonna do is you picked out one of your just kind of technology threads. And I'm gonna read this thread, and then we're gonna talk about it. So let's get right into this. I'm just going to go word for word. When there's images, I will describe them, and we will link this in the show notes so you can go read it for yourself. This is one of my personal favorite Gravis threads, so I'm super stoked for this. All right, so this was on July 27th of this year. Hi, everyone. I just had a fucking heart attack over an eBay listing, but I've decided not to buy it, so I'm going to share it with you. If you're a certain type of person, seeing this thumbnail on eBay makes you shoot out of your seat and through the roof of your house like the Great Glass Elevator. And this tweet is a picture of... So there's a keyboard, like an old keyboard, and on top of that is another layer. Both of these layers are like yellow plastic. On the second layer, there's a phone and like a phone keypad and some more random buttons. And stacked on top of this double-decker thing is a really small screen with a floppy disk drive, I think. Not because I know what it is and it's valuable, but because I have never seen anything like it in my life. And I have seen some shit, my friend. If you don't know, this is in the design language and characteristic yellowed plastic of the Panasonic Easyphone, a wide-ranging, I cannot overstate this, series of telephones, PBXs, and associated equipment Panasonic sold in the 80s and 90s. Easyphones were never the shit. Nordle was the shit. ROM, NEC, never Panasonic. I mean, look at the name. It's clearly intended for small fries. And indeed, Easyphone systems can mostly be operated by just slamming some phone lines into them. I had an Easyphone PBX once, the KX-T616. How do you install it? Well, see the bottom holes? Plug phone lines into those top holes. Plug any goddamn phone you have into them. It works with plain old POTS phones. If you didn't have Panasonic's TDM phones, in this image there's a picture of the phone in question and a bunch of like random junk old phones connected to it. Gravis?
You mind if I insert some details?
Go for it.
For context here, what you have to understand is that the device that I'm describing here, a PBX, that is essentially a phone system, like the larger phone system, that you can plug telephones into, and it lets you call between them. You can't just plug a telephone into another telephone. It has to have some sort of computer, basically, at the center of it. Some sort of powered system that understands what it means when you dial a number and understands how to ring a telephone. And the thing that we would call a PBX is a miniaturized version of the thing that lets you call your friend at another house or make a call on your cell phone, but it goes into a business normally. And it's to allow, you to have 300 phones at this business, and they can all call between each other. And you've got voicemail, and you've got people can forward their phones to other phones and that sort of thing. And what's special about this is that typically all those other names that I rattled off there, Nortel, Roam, NEC, these were designed for businesses. Men in suits who would spend $2,500 a month on just making phone calls come into the building. And they would plug a type of telephone line you've never heard of called a PRI that looks like a network cable, but it carries 23 phone calls at once. And you'd plug one or like 7 of these into your PBX so that all of your salespeople could reach out and telemarket. This one is special because it uses not only ordinary phone lines like you would have coming into your house in 1986, but it uses ordinary phones, not expensive digital phones like all those corporations would buy. In other words, Panasonic was selling this to the bottom of the barrel users who couldn't afford what other businesses could afford.
Neat. Thank you for the clarifications. And that was it. At that point, you'd be getting calls. You needed one digital phone to program the system on a 2-line LCD, I think like a North Star. These were basic with a capital B. So when this thing materialized, I immediately flipped out because, Christ, what nightmare did Panasonic build here? Is this a semi-graphical, like text mode graphics, management console to simplify administrating an Easyphone? The back has a serial port in the center and some line jacks, so I was thinking, is this a TDM phone that speaks RPC over native TDM? Gravis, what are these acronyms?
Okay, so TDM is time division multiplexing. We're already into the Star Trek terminology.
No kidding.
What it means is that at this time you were expected, if you bought a serious professional phone system, you would buy a telephone that spoke to it in its native language rather than sending tones down the line to tell it what to do. It would speak to it in a native language that was proprietary to that system, which everybody did, except for Panasonic. They had that product, but you could also use normal phones with it. And what I'm speculating at here, forgive the extremely cryptic phrase RPC over native TDM. What I mean by that is, my theory looking at this thing was that this was something you would use to put a normal, graphical interface onto what was normally a very difficult device to administrate. So I looked at this, right, and my context-sensitive brain, having been staring at this kind of thing for 20 years, said to me the most likely explanation for what the thing I was seeing on my screen was that it was a solution that was fielded and failed to solve a problem that has always existed in this field. In PBXs, they've always been hard to program. And so my brain said, wait a minute, did Panasonic come up with a solution that no one remembers?
And the picture in this tweet is just a picture of the back of this phone with a couple jacks and a ribbon cable and some ports, etc., etc. It's kind of cute. But anyways, let's move on. I shipped it over to @Goot, G-E-W-T. That's one of Gravis's tech nerd friends who I also follow on Twitter. They're great. Because, I mean, of course I did. And we started talking about me buying it and sending it to her because when I'm done with it, because whatever it is, I don't have the space to feed and care for it. Feed and care for it. I love it. I love it.
I'm just putting floppy disks into it. The lights get brighter.
As we're talking about it, though, I start to have doubts. I stare at the back for a while longer, and I'm thinking, something doesn't line up here. If you look closely, you can just make out that these, and this is a zoom in of the last picture showing the jacks on the back of this phone, these are labeled line 1, 2, line 1, and line 2. Whoops, that tears it. There's absolutely no way this is a TDM phone. TDM phones have no use for multiple jacks because they can only do one call at a time anyway, so the PBX just sends whichever call is active over the line. There's no TDM phone ever made that has had more than one phone jack. It just doesn't make sense. There are no other jacks, so no, this is an analog phone. At about this time, I found a listing in a 1988 electronics magazine confirming that it's a phone with a rudimentary PC in it. I already have notions of what this is. And I just like the N in notions is capital. And when you see this sort of thing in Gravis's Twitter lexicon, it means that he hates it.
I did. This was the 1,000-ton weight that broke the camel's back. I went from 60 to 0 in one click. What you have to understand is that the process of researching these things is miserable because of Google. It's not possible to go to a library and read about a product like this because, in particular, this specific type of device is of a category that never made its way into magazines, never made its way into anything consumer-oriented, because you would never have bought this thing, ever. This would have been purchased by a purchasing manager. This is a product that was never meant to be sold to anyone but a business, and that business would never have read a magazine about it. What they would have done is they would have made a call to their Panasonic sales representative, or more likely they would have gotten a call from that person off of a lead like Glengarry Glen Ross, who would say, I think I have just the thing for you. So there were no catalogs that you'd find this in. This was a product that existed to the public world as nothing other than a line item in a catalog that was just line items that you would get as a salesman for Panasonic. You spoke to a man over the phone to learn that this thing even existed. And in this particular case, I did find it in an electronics magazine, but that required going to Google and searching for like increasingly weird things. Google tries to help. Google helps. Google wants to help. And Google's all we have. So you have to learn how to keep Google from helping you. So when you type in Panasonic KX-D4985, what Google does is it strips out like 3/4 of that and searches for Panasonic KX and nothing else. Because it goes, I didn't find many results for that. You probably didn't want that. So it just starts taking things out till it gets like a score it likes. And so you have to start doing things like, how do I think this was formatted on the page? I'll put quotes around KX dash, but maybe I should try it without the dash. I should try it with a space. I should take out, you just keep trying things after, all these different ways of formatting the search phrase, trying, setting time ranges, going to Google Books specifically, going to Google Image Search, and trying to, from image search, find a page with a picture, and from there, get a search term from that page to take back to Google, and so on and so forth. It's just an endless rabbit hole. And the best part about this is actually in the next tweet.
We shall continue. Finally, @Goot finds a manual, which I could not for the life of me locate because she is the PBX Whisperer. That is an incredible title. This confirms my fears. It's dead f***ing boring.
In other words, Goot was able to find this in like 2 minutes. I don't know how she did it, but the thing you have to understand, I am kinda into phones. I used to have a phone system in my house. She has 7. She has an unbelievable number of phones. She has phone systems that I bought years ago bought a bunch of accessories for, then realized they were way over my head and had to get rid of. She bought them, bought the accessories, bought more accessories, learned how to program a 1988 device that all the manuals for are only in paper format, and it's like you have to get into an interface and type in like cryptic, like 80s hacker movie things in order to make the thing work at all. And she learned all this deliberately. I don't know what kind of motivation you could have other than it's just your thing, right? And so I was shocked, but also not shocked, because my domain knowledge is for finding consumer things. Hers, however, has been absolutely steeped in finding the unfindable in this one specific laser-focused category. And this is pretty much how it goes. If you're talking to a retro electronics nerd, they have their thing that is their focus. I have focuses. And within those, I can find stuff really fast because I've spent years sitting in front of an empty Google result page going, ugh, I wish I could just find out whether this thing is even cool. And I just beat on it and beat on it and beat on it until I got the answers I wanted. But I didn't learn the skills for every category. So you do. When I say PBX Whisperer, I mean it. If you're going to look for something old, you need to find a person who will guide you there. You can ask. They'll help you.
Cool. It's good to know. I may have some questions for you later. Let's continue. Here's the first screen from the manual. This, combined with the clipping from the magazine, says, it just makes phone calls and is a big contact book. And here's a picture of, like, basically a manual's computer screen showing that the phone can do various things with function keys, like find contacts. Yawn, honestly. This absolutely nails it in my mind. This thing is precisely a completely analog 2-line Panasonic POTS phone grafted onto a VT-style dumb terminal. A late model VT with advanced features, but it's just a dumb terminal with a modem, and there's more manual pictures in the suite. Again, we'll have the thread linked in the show notes so you can go read this whole fascinating experience for yourself. Dialing with a computer modem and then picking up the handset was old hat by this point. Like 70s old, so millennia in computer years. This is literally nothing special. And then the final tweet in this thread, which is my personal favorite. Lessons. 1. Do not let me on eBay. I spent an hour on the trail of this thing. 2. Panasonic disappointed me like they trained for it. End thread. And that right there is a Gravis Twitter thread. And this is just what Gravis does. And honestly, you answered like all of my questions in the reading of the thread, so Kaylee, do you have anything you want to ask?
No, not really, honestly. Big Q&A because you answered all the questions live.
I'm very sorry. I felt
Nuts.
I felt the jargon I was using was so obscure. I didn't want people to forget what I had said by the time I explained it.
See, but like, I feel like there's something to reading a Gravis Twitter thread, and there's like 14 different acronyms you don't know. Like, I don't know what a POTS phone is. I don't care. I absolutely could not care less about what a POTS phone is. I just want to hear you scream about them. And that is the beauty of twitter.com/Gravislizard. And yeah, you answered all of my questions in there, except for, I guess, the one final question. Does this piece of work reflect your queer identity? I challenge you to connect this weird, boring phone to being gay. You've got 10 seconds. Go.
You don't have 10 seconds.
We talked about this offline. we talked about this on Twitter, and I had a really hard time. I don't know. I tried. I thought for several days, and I'm not sure there's anything directly queer about this, but I will say this. The best I can do is to say that I don't think you can be queer without hoping for a better world, and hoping that we can undo the mistakes we made in the past, and hoping that the future will be, at a minimum, safer, but hopefully nicer for the people that come after us. And I don't know that it's, well, we would have to get too deep into the philosophy, which I do genuinely hold, for me to justify saying that this is a form of protest. I don't want to come off like this is at all relevant in an era when Nazis are very, very close to getting into every public office. No, I'm not doing anything so important. But there's a lot of people that are doing a great job of making a lot of noise and not letting anyone forget that things are going to hell in a big way, socially speaking, in ways that uniquely affect us. Meanwhile, we do need to think at some point about the minutia, the things that make life stressful in between the really bad stuff. And yes, I play a lot of old video games, but I mess with a lot of old things that are of no value, but I can't get over the fact that Silicon Valley destroyed everything that was interesting about the human race in more of a literal way than I wish was true. We used to have ambition. We used to have hope, not just socially speaking, but in our consumer toys, in the things that we bought to hopefully buy a more interesting life or to make things easier for ourselves. I look at a lot of stuff that's not just fun. It's not just a gadget. It's something that actually would have changed your life and made it better. There were so many attempts in the early computer era to introduce things that would make your home life easier, make your life less stressful. And they all failed. And they failed for 70 years and continued to fail and fail all the way through my life until I was in my 20s when they finally released the iPhone, which could listen to your voice and then set a reminder for you to take your meds. That was the first time computers helped anyone. And I'm kind of not joking. They've done such a poor job. They've done such a poor job. Why is it that my Windows 10 computer can't tell me to take my pills? It won't do it. I have to get a program for that. Earlier versions of computers, things that we didn't take, the paths not traveled, did do these things. It feels like in 1998 everything just froze. Everything just became stagnant and we stopped making new things. And everything is now just 1998 or 1984, depending on your perspective, replayed and replayed and replayed with a new coat of paint. The computers we have are worse than the ones we had in 1996 in a lot of ways. And what I would like is to see people get angry about that. I would like people to be mad that we keep having to go out and spend $600 on a phone that's no better and in some ways worse than the one we had in 2008. We're not taking control of our lives in this way because we've all been convinced that there is no future but the one that just simply happens to us, and that we have no control over what these companies make for us. I'm not sure that that has any relevance to serious social discourse, but I do think that we are, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, dependent on these things. They are intertwined with our lives in ways that we cannot separate. And I think it's in all of our interest to not forget the things that could have happened and still could, the ways that these could have benefited us, and how interesting life could be with electronics, with computers, and other things that have grown stagnant over the decades. We don't need to just accept what we're given. We could have something better.
That was equal parts fascinating and depressing. Thank you for that.
It's
wow.
me. Hi. Follow me on Twitter.
Wow.
So I'm sorry. I don't think I could nail the queerness connection, but I am extremely gay. So if it helps, what's gay about retro electronics? Me, buddy.
I mean, hey, if we're following the rules of anime time, since you were talking that entire time, that took approximately 3 seconds. So, great job. You got all that out in 10 seconds. Let's move on to some questions from our listeners. Kaylee, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Just before we get into the questions, if you would like to ask a question to us or one of our future guests, you can either talk to us on Twitter at strqueercast, or you can email us at settingtherecordqueer@gmail.com, and your question might show up on this show. So our first question for this week is from @Jenkar89. What's the story behind your favorite tech item?
What is my favorite tech item?
I mean, if you even just want to pick one with an interesting story,
Or
it's
if you
fine.
don't...
Nope, Gravis jumps up to grab something.
The MSX. Man.
I mean, I like the MSX, so
I
great.
didn't know if you're familiar with them, but
Metal Gear MSX is on my
I feel like I've heard of a lot of the retro technologies you've brought up just from the fact that they are referenced in Homestar Runner.
did Homestar Runner reference the MSX?
Strongbad would talk about a lot of retro technologies as if they had come out like the previous day.
Yes, that's true. I don't know of anything that has like a deep personal story, but I kind of dig the MSX probably the most. It was one of the first things that I really went out of my way to add to my collection, because at one point I had thrown away almost all of the old electronics I had. I sort of tried to just get out of it, as it were, for reasons. Again, it was cluttering up my house, and I felt like I was going nowhere with it. And I sort of got myself back into it by spending a really phenomenal amount of money on this computer from Japan. And the reason is, as soon as I read about the MSX for the first time, I was just deeply captivated by it. Its concept, as far as where it came from, is just incredible. It's not one console. It's not a computer from a company. It's a standard for making computers that Microsoft of Japan came out with in the early 80s. I didn't even know there was a Microsoft of Japan. Turns out they formed in the late 70s. I have no idea why. I think I went to research it and didn't really come back with a satisfying answer. At the beginning of the 80s, there was this impression that all the computer manufacturers had that we were going to have an explosion of home computers, and everyone wanted to be on top of it. And Microsoft took the interesting approach of not trying to make them, but instead they came up with just a standard for, you use this CPU running at this speed with this much memory minimum. You can plug in this type of cartridge using this type of connector, and it gives it this sort of access to the bus and everything. And then they allowed anyone to make it. I don't know if there was a license cost or anything, but subsequently everyone made them. Panasonic, and under their national brand as well, they made some beautiful ones. Sony made a ton of them with all sorts of different capabilities. Sharp, I have a little tiny Sharp one here. It's like the smallest one they ever made. And I got it for like $23 off of eBay from Japan. And they're all the same type of computer, but in all different sizes. Now, of course, we have this now, right? It's like our computers, mine's this gigantic black tower, but you could also get one that fits on a stick the size of your thumb. But the thing is, this was all happening in 1984 and 83, and the IBM PC was actually competing with this thing. And so you read about this, you're like, oh, it's a game console. Well, sort of, but it's also like a home computer that was intended to be what our computers ended up being. It's pretty much my favorite piece of retro electronics, not just as an item, but as an entire market that used to exist.
So the other question we want to ask from our viewers is from @6armedsweater on Twitter. What supposedly obsolete technology deserves to make a comeback, and why?
Oh, geez. Mini disc. No, I'll go with this. Mini disc.
That's the thing in a GameCube, right?
No, that's a GD-ROM. And then there was the 6-centimeter CD-ROM, which you can still get. And those, I think they hold like a 200, 150 megs.
I remember
like
those. I had some like Pokemon ones with Mew on it.
That's adorable. The mini disc, a lot of people will know what this is. The mini disc was a 80s Sony thing. It was something like the size. No, it was smaller than the discs that were used in the GameCube. It was smaller than a floppy disk, I believe, but a little bit thicker, and it had a spinning disc in it. And the disc was not optical; it was magneto-optical. I'd have to actually hit Wikipedia to fact check myself, but my recollection is that basically it's like a CD that you burn, except that when you heat up the surface of the disc, it becomes easier to change its magnetic polarity. And so it's like a magnetic disc which you can laser focus your writes on, so it's higher capacity than other magnetic discs of the time. It's weird. It's weird technology. It almost took off like 3 or 4 different times. Magneto-optical was supposed to be the thing that sort of superseded floppy disks, and it almost happened. There used to be these magneto-optical discs that were like several It's like 800 or 900 megs, or maybe like 1.2 gigs or something, but they were massive. They were like 5-6 inches across, like big heavy things. And they sort of petered out in the 90s. But the Sony mini disc, the important thing about this is that Shinji has one in Ava. No. Really, they're the most stylish thing. So unlike a normal CD, it has a built-in case, so you can't just touch the surface and smudge it up. But it's small, and my opinion is that, and I'm dead serious about this, it has so many advantages. It's not like flash memory, which can go bad or can get electrically damaged, right? You can't like static shock it, so it's going to be more durable. More importantly, it's bigger than like SD cards or anything, and I have the firm belief that MP3 players are sort of the bane of existence. I use them. I have Spotify on my phone. I haven't listened to physical media in ages. I actually started listening to tapes recently, but they have huge disadvantages. Minidisc, however, you've got this device that's like 4 or 5 inches. No, it's less than that. It's like 3 to 4 inches square and like as thick as like a candy bar. And you pop the cover and you put in this disc and you close it, and it's like a CD player, except it's got way higher capacity and better quality, and it can be rewritten like many times. And most importantly, like Google it, they're all beautiful. They're like the natural evolution of CDs that should have happened. And at a minimum, even if they shouldn't be around now, they should have lasted way up into like the late 2000s. I'm angry that they didn't. Not just for nostalgia purposes, I think they legitimately would have been a better format than anything else that we kept.
Those sound pretty great.
I think we're ready to move into our final segment for this podcast, which is my question of the week. So for those first-time listeners we have, I ask a question. It's, say, interesting question.
It's like a weird personality test question disguised as something that's relevant to the podcast subject material.
Tenuously connected to the podcast subject material.
That's how I describe it anyways.
Like my answer to the queerness question.
Exactly. If you were a retro computer, what kind of features would you have?
MIDI in and out. Absolutely. Everything should have MIDI. Dang. There's so many times you could have asked me this, I would have had like 13 things to say. But you can just keep MIDI in and out. Like, that's good enough.
You know, usually the guest goes last when we do these questions, but you just jumped on that. And I have some respect for that. I think, all right, if I was an old computer, I think I also want to be like Gravis, you have like good audio in and out. Because like, I feel like modern computers are pretty good at video stuff, but they're all absolutely garbage at audio. And the only way you get good audio on a modern computer is you install extra ports and a bunch of garbage. No, I want that stuff there from the get-go. I want a really cute little like doll dress-up program. That's me on a computer. Fantastic. And then it can play video games. I don't know what kind of video games. Maybe just like, I don't know, DOS games. Or, you know, some like proprietary equivalent to DOS that never actually got anything good. But hey, it was certainly there.
No, I'd just be a Tiger electronic handheld. That's it. That's the whole answer.
But in full color. Can we get that? Can Tiger start making handhelds that only play one game? But it's like a GBA game?
Can we get like Tiger Handheld Electronics presents Angry Birds?
Okay, don't, because I'm here for it. That sounds rad.
I agree.
Sounds rad as heck. It's just like inside, it's just like a little epoxy blob, and all it does is play Angry Birds.
I love it.
I'm here for it.
Gravis, we love you. Thank you so much for coming onto this podcast and gushing to us about weird circuit boards. That was incredible.
Thank you so much for having me. I literally, it is impossible to stop me from speaking about this, so I'm glad that you were willing to allow me to grace your microphones with it. Well, my microphone, but your dot wave. I'm glad you had me on your dot wave.
We were happy to have you on the dot wave. Gravis, where can the people find you if they want to see all of these fascinating Twitter threads and YouTube videos?
Hit up my Twitter, twitter.com/Gravislizard. By the way, that is Gravis as in the old sound card manufacturer. Yep, straight up named myself after it.
So that's where that name comes from. That was something I should have asked.
I never had the Gravis Ultrasound, which was the sound card that was their flagship product. What I had was a Gravis joystick, and I always wanted the Gravis gamepad, and I now have one, and it's okay. But I just love the name and the logo, and I printed a Gravis shirt, which I normally wear whenever I have a party. Anyway, twitter.com /Gravislizard. And if you look at my profile there, I have a YouTube channel, which I cannot fit into words because the name is so awkward. It's El Hectronics. I should change it. It's such an awkward handle, but you'll find a link to that in my Twitter bio. And I also have a website, which has a whole bunch of weird stuff on it, but it now has a blog. And if you subscribe to that via RSS, I periodically post things like I've been trying to do art on my Commodore 64 because I got a graphics tablet for it. And when I get that set back up, you'll see more art, more paintings from my wretched hand.
Gravis's Commodore 64 paintings are incredible. Speaking of things you can subscribe to via RSS, how about this podcast? Setting the Record Queer. You can subscribe to it via RSS and many other things. So, before I get into the podcast plugs, I want to say something really exciting, really cool that you'll know about when this podcast releases already. For this episode and every following episode, probably, we are moving from monthly to bi-weekly because we enjoy doing this and you seem to enjoy listening to it. So you can catch episodes now every other Tuesday. Isn't that pretty radical? Tuesdays kind of suck. Now you've got Setting the Record Queer every other Tuesday. You can find Setting the Record Queer at settingtherecordqueer.com, which is currently just a redirect to iTunes. Hopefully we'll fix that soon. You can also find it under the same name on SoundCloud, Google Play, Stitcher, and Spotify. If there's somewhere else you want to see it, just let us know. You can get in contact to us on Twitter at STRQueercast or via email at settingtherecordqueer@gmail.com. Get in contact with us if you want to see the podcast somewhere else, if you have a thought, an idea for what or who could be on the podcast, or maybe if you think you'd be a good guest for the podcast, reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy this podcast, like it, leave a review, tell a friend, that sort of stuff. It's really, really helpful. Also get in contact if you have questions for us or for our guests. Okay. Blah, 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 blah. Our fantastic logo was done by Cubotic. That's QBTIC on Twitter and Cobot, QOBOT.tumblr.com. Our theme music was made by Thrill Me Music, who you can find more about at thrillmemusic.squarespace.com. This podcast was edited by Kaylee and produced, mixed, and mastered by yours truly, Alexis. Kaylee, where can the people find you?
People can find me on Twitch at witches_hex. That's WITCHS_hex, or on Twitter at the same handle without the underscore.
And you can find me on Twitter at Princess Proto, YouTube and Twitch at Proto Magical Girl, or Twitch at proto.ml. And if you want to join my Discord community and come hang out with a bunch of queers who may or may not like to play video games fast and share pictures of the objective best Pokemon Rowlet, you can do so at proto.ml/D. Our favorite answer to last week's Kaylee's question of the week, which was describe your life as a light novel title, was from Krista. I thought that liking computers was what defined me until I joined my first fandom and found out that I was a polyamorous lesbian cat girl. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. We will be back the next Tuesday. If you have just enjoyed Setting the Record Queer, bye-bye.